Joe.
Whether you want us or not.
Yep, coming at you. So we got lots of local news for you. Top story, Joey Gibson faces charges related to May Day cider riot. Gibson is being charged with rioting in connection to the May Day incident at Portland's cider riot bar. He's the leader of right-wing group Patriot Prayer, and as of Thursday was preparing to turn himself in. The charge comes months after the bar owner sued, saying Gibson and his group came to fight his customers. Gibson's lawyer says no videos show him being violent. The lawyer says Gibson's charges are part of a, quote, dishonest campaign by Portland leaders to blame out-of-town demonstrators for violence that began and persists because Antifa wants to shut down any right-wing demonstrations in Portland.
I've been dabbling with studies of logic recently and logical fallacies. And one of them is citing a lack of evidence as evidence that you didn't do something. So, for instance, saying that there are no videos of a person being violent is not actually evidence that they have not that they were not violent in that case.
Yeah.
But it simply means that no one happened to catch that moment on video.
Yeah, so we talked both on Tuesday and Wednesday about the upcoming protests that are happening Saturday. This seems to be an effort to get one of the leaders off of the streets on Saturday that he needs to report in because he's being prosecuted. So we also wait with bated breath what tomorrow is going to look like. There was a gathering, not a demonstration, maybe. Well, that's a good question. What is a demonstration versus just a gathering? But the mayor convened local nonprofits and government agencies, higher education institutions to send a message that violence isn't welcome in this community. So that happened on Wednesday. Reports said about 100 people or so showed up. So.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of question about how, in particular, how Mayor Wheeler is talking about these protests, right?
Yep.
And sort of is, I think a lot of people sort of question his encouragement that people just stay away. And on one hand, like, I think there are ways in which that seems like a sort of prudent recommendation. And I think there's definitely folks, particularly on the left, who are saying, no, like, we're not staying away from right-wing protesters. Like, we need to sort of show that that's not welcome here. So there's tension there. And then a lot of Wheeler's rhetoric ends up sort of equating this, these Patriot Prayer groups and Proud Boys with sort of civil rights protesters or demonstrators, or Antifa protesters and demonstrators. And so there's sort of, I think we've seen over the last several years that Wheeler has sort of consistently gotten criticism for his handling of protests from every direction. And it doesn't appear that there's anyone who thinks he's managing it well, unfortunately. And we've also talked about how it's a hard job, right? Like figuring out how to walk the line with freedom of speech issues, safety issues, right? What's the right approach to policing? And so there's interesting questions and I think we can, we'll see how it all unfolds.
Yeah, absolutely.
City Commissioner Amanda Fritz, I like this headline. City Commissioner Amanda Fritz lectured a guy who does not want a pot dispensary next to his daughter's kindergarten. Last week, the father wrote to Fritz expressing his concern, and Fritz responded by noting that the plans for the new pot shop are illegal, but she went further, comparing cannabis to alcohol and also giving parenting advice. She asked, quote, "Do you avoid taking your children to restaurants where alcohol is served? Why do you consider cannabis more harmful than alcohol?" She went on, saying, "If you don't want your children to buy cannabis once they are of age to be carded and buy it, I recommend you take this opportunity to instill your values into your family while they still believe every word you say is true." End quote. Parents in the Selwood neighborhood have been vocally opposed to the new opening of a new electric lettuce store on 13th Ave next to a preschool and kindergarten. Oregon law forbids dispensaries within 1,000 feet of, quote, a public elementary or secondary school for which attendance is compulsory, or, quote, a private or parochial elementary or secondary school that teaches kindergarten through 12th grade. Preschools are not mentioned. Some of the parents appealing to local officials say they do not oppose the legal cannabis industry, but they do not want dispensaries and their advertising right next to their kids' schools. One parent said, quote, "Nobody is arguing against the industry. If we continue to go down this path, Oregon is going to become a case study in how not to legalize the cannabis industry." Some other cities, like Gresham, have decided to add daycares and preschools to the list of properties shielded from new dispensaries opening within 1,000 feet of them. And we should note that Electric Lettuce is a sponsor of ours.
Yeah. There was something similar that happened. I was just looking in Amsterdam, one of the oldest cafes. Yeah, here it is. Oldest cannabis cafes in Amsterdam had to close because of its proximity to a school. And I feel like their rules are banning coffee shops that sell marijuana from being within 250 meters of a school.
Oh, that's much. Well, that's about 700. Yeah. It's similar. Well, I think what's different there, though, right? Like a cannabis dispensary is a retail outlet,
Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Like I think in the same way that, like, I don't know, banning a bar next to a preschool
Right.
could have some logic.
Different.
But banning a grocery store that sells beer and wine wouldn't make sense to me. And so I think I would wonder about sort of, I don't know, it creates this perception, I think, around like the scariness of cannabis that doesn't check out for me. But I'm also not a parent, so.
Yeah, I was just looking at when that rule went through in Amsterdam as well. It's relatively recent. We've got some more a local 2020 story. Very exciting. Democrat Jamie McLeod Skinner plans to run for Secretary of State in 2020. McLeod Skinner ran for Congress against Representative Greg Walden in 2018 and was the most serious challenger for Walden in years. Last week, she registered her political action committee for her 2020 Secretary of State bid. In an interview, McLeod Skinner said she can bridge Oregon's urban-rural divide by bringing, quote, that rural perspective to the conversation. If elected, she said she would pursue an idea pitched by unsuccessful 2016 Democratic Secretary of State candidate Brad Avakian, auditing private companies that do business with the state. Oregon Secretary of State Dennis Richardson died of brain cancer in February, and the Secretary of State's race is wide open, with current Secretary of State Bev Clarno not expected to run.
Secretary of State's a weird role in Oregon, right?
Yeah.
They oversee audits, which are generally focused on state government, either management or financial.
Yep.
They oversee elections, including things like the ballot measure process. And they serve functionally as a lieutenant governor, as the next in line, which is how Kate Brown first became governor, was when Kitzhaber had to resign over sort of corruption scandal. Kate Brown was currently serving as Secretary of State and stepped right in. And so it's very much a launching pad to other things, and I think it strikes me as funny because I think it's a below the radar race in a lot of ways. I don't know that a lot of Oregonians, I don't know that your everyday Oregonian is paying a ton of attention to the Secretary of State, but it holds a lot of clout in a way that something like the Labor Commissioner, which is another statewide office, or the Treasurer, don't hold the same sort of influence and aren't sort of the same launching pad, I wouldn't think.
Yeah, this is going to be an exciting
important race
to watch. Yeah, absolutely. So several folks out in the state right now, and especially several in the Portland area, thinking about running for statewide races, folks like Jennifer Williamson. So keep an eye out.
Wait, say that again?
Jennifer Williamson, considering different roles on a statewide level.
I was like, I thought there'd been an announcement.
No,
and I was like,
no announcement.
Where is
Just
Jennifer running? Tell me more.
No, we've got a lot of really talented elected officials out there looking for their next step. So,
Yeah.
Looking forward to more announcements in the coming weeks, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
You get this story.
Do I? So a Portland developer offered some advice. Last month, a right-wing protester named Haley Adams held a small demonstration in front of Mayor Ted Wheeler's home. She posted a photo of herself in his front yard on Facebook. Real estate investor Marty Kehoe replied, saying, quote, "People should be bussed up to his mansion to pee and poop on his front porch."
What is happening in the world? This is not okay. No, we don't do that.
He said, Kehoe said, quote, then he might understand how the rest of us feel. Maybe then Ted Weasel is Kehoe's choice. Would put on his big boy pants and do something for our city. When asked about his comment, Kehoe said he didn't remember making it. He did say, quote, I own a lot of properties in downtown, and I can show you pictures of people, well, expletives, but essentially pooping and peeing in my doorways. I have a lot of frustration. Responding to Kehoe, Mayor Wheeler said, when he's ready, I look forward to having Marty Kehoe join other business leaders and community partners who are working with the city in investing and addressing homelessness, public safety, and livability. This is the kind of this is just unproductive, right? Like, there's so little value to this.
Yeah, for sure. You're listening to X-Ray FM at KXRY Portland and KQAC HD3 Portland at 107.1 and 91.1 FM. Streaming online everywhere at xray.fm. Yeah, that's the story. Let's see. 2 Oregon pharmacies sold millions of opioid pills, making them top in the nation. I know how awake I am by whether I can pronounce opioid or not.
Oh, is that your indicator?
That's it. That and Erdogan.
Oh, Erdogan. That's real.
The 2 rural Oregon pharmacies sold more opioid pills per county resident than 99.9% of other pharmacies in the country. Howard's Drugs is the only pharmacy in Lake County. They filled enough prescriptions for every resident to take 68 pills a year. That put Howard's 10th on a list of top sellers nationally in the 7-year period ending in 2012. The owner of Howard's Drugs said he was aware of cases that seemed suspicious but could do nothing about them if the prescription appeared legitimate. The 68 pills per resident that Howard's sold annually was an extreme outlier. No one else among Oregon's 803 pharmacies came close. Only 34 had a rate higher than 10 per person. Howard said his drugstore had a high rate of opioid sales because it is the only pharmacy in a large county and because the opioid prescription culture in the late 1990s and early 2000s encouraged giving people narcotic pain pills. Another pharmacy in Grant County sold one patient more than 1,000 pills in 1 month. Say that again. A pharmacy in Grant County sold one patient more than 1,000 pills in 1 month. The owner of Len's Pharmacy said it was an error and the prescriber was addicted herself.
Oh.
Since 2012, state and federal efforts have led to a decline in prescriptions. Pharmacists said they've seen that decline firsthand, as well as a dramatic change in the medical culture surrounding pain pills. Still, about 68,000 people died from opioid overdoses last year alone.
This raises an interesting question for me. Do you feel like the pharmacy, the dispensary, sort of holds the same level of responsibility as the doctor, the prescriber?
Absolutely.
Really? Interesting.
I do, yeah. If something looks weird, I think you call and double check.
Well, but is there any sense that these prescriptions weren't valid?
He said that there was one that they thought filled like a lot.
Yeah, that's true. He
was aware of cases that seemed suspicious, but could do nothing about them if the prescription appeared legitimate.
That's fair. Well, yeah, and I guess that's the interesting.
So if you get you can imagine a paper script that someone brings and
true.
Here, give me 1,000 pills. I'd be like, okay, and then go call and be like, hey, just double checking.
Yeah, that's fair. I think when you said appeared legitimate, I think I understood that as were legitimate.
Yeah.
Because I think that's an interesting tension, right? Like pharmacists have relatively little power, sort of in that process, relative to if doctors are wildly over prescribing.
Right. Yeah. I think you do absolutely have a point. If there is a physician, it's not like a bar where you can cut someone off.
Right.
Like if that is I would be curious about what options a pharmacy has to deny filling a prescription.
Yeah, there is some, which I only know because there's been issues in some rural counties around queer folks accessing PrEP or hormones or other things. So pharmacists, whether or not they do so legally, do take some amount of leeway. But I also sort of am like, yeah, it's an interesting question. I would not have thought to hold pharmacists accountable in the same way as doctors or the pharmaceutical companies themselves. But I think you make a good point, right? There's a lot of people in the process and a lot of places. And I think in this case, right, we're talking about one patient receiving more than 1,000 pills in a month, and the prescriber was addicted. But see, that was interesting because it's the prescriber, the doctor, that was addicted, not the pharmacist. Which is an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting. This would be a good interview to go more in depth with, because not only do you have the situation of PrEP, also thinking about birth control, thinking about opioids, like where is the line of what a pharmacy can deny and not?
Yeah,
it's just doing a quick Google search, all kinds of stories about.
Yeah, and I would bet the rules vary by state, because in some states, right, in Oregon, I believe a pharmacist can prescribe birth control, right? Like you don't need to go to a doctor. There's talk in some states of PrEP being similar. So PrEP for folks it stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis, and is a daily pill that people take to prevent HIV. And there's talk of that becoming something that a pharmacist can provide as well.
Yeah, so there are 8 states in the country who are required to provide medication. There are 6, maybe 7 states that can refuse to provide medication but must refer patients elsewhere. That's Oregon. Oregon's in that category. And then there are 6 states where pharmacists can refuse to provide medication and are not required to refer patients elsewhere. So this is interesting. So based on their own personal beliefs.
Yeah, that does not add up to 50.
No, because there's lots of states that don't have any guidance on that.
Oh, they just have nothing. And okay, gotcha.
Yep.
I was like, wait a second.
This source was a National Women's Law Center.
Oh, right.
And founded on NBC News. So it's an interesting thing to like really dig into. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because that middle ground one, right, where you can deny prescription, but you have to refer people elsewhere, less of an issue for most of Oregon, though in some cases it's a big issue. I've heard from activists in Montana about and Wyoming, where it's they refer you to a pharmacy that's 300 miles away, right? Like there very well might not be a single pharmacist that will fill it within, a 2-hour drive. And so it's an interesting question. And then I think this opioid case brings up sort of more complicated issues about what is the status quo in terms of how much discretion pharmacists have, and what should it be, right?
Yeah.
On one hand, we probably wish that pharmacists had the ability to sort of be like, whoa, these opioid prescriptions are just way beyond, even if they're legitimate, right? Even if the doctor did actually write that script, there are probably cases where a pharmacist could have been like, whoa, this is a lot.
Right, yeah.
And do we want pharmacists to be a check on doctors in one way?
Right, and our pharmacy is liable in this situation where they're handing out 1,000 pills to one person in a month.
Yeah.
What's their responsibility there?
Absolutely. So moving on to some good news, actually our last local story.
Yep.
After 3 months on a boil water order, the Warm Springs Indian Reservation's water has been deemed safe. The reservation has been without safe drinking water all summer after a burst pipe caused a cascading infrastructure failure. The Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs say numerous improvements have been made to the infrastructure, including a repair of the water main break. They did not say that more work is expected. Tribal utilities and wastewater staff completed 2 rounds of testing for bacterial contamination and then returned negative results. These were submitted to the Environmental Protection Agency in order to lift the boil water notice. I think the fact that we had sort of a community in Oregon, so the Warm Springs Reservation is in Central Oregon, that functionally didn't have water for 3 months, and I feel like it got shockingly little coverage for sort of how wild that is. And I think made me appreciate to some degree how I think I've long wondered how it's possible that Flint has gone so long without clean water, and I think sort of the situation on the Warm Springs Reservation made me go, oh, That's how. Like, it gets some coverage early on and then totally drops away.
Totally. Absolutely.
So it's awesome that they've gotten that back together.
I have a wild card story. In Virginia, security cameras captured a man dressed as an old TV, dumping old TVs on people's yards. No fewer than 60 residents woke up to find vintage television sets in their yards. The neighbor that caught the act on surveillance footage said, quote, "It was a guy dressed in a jumpsuit with a TV for a head. It's the weirdest thing. He squats down, puts the TV there, and walks off. It's really weird." Police said they think there is more than one suspect and that they could be charged with littering and illegal dumping.
What? I get why that's a wild card. People do wacky things. I think I would last thing I would flag on the national level. Trump's latest proposal would let businesses discriminate based on LGBT status, race, religion, and more. Through the Labor Department, Trump is issuing a rule which applies to federal contractors and is the president's latest move to let religious people sidestep civil rights protections. Fundamentally, federal contractors under this rule would be allowed to discriminate against LGBT folks, pretty much anyone. That's who we would most expect to be discriminated if the contractor says that they have closely held faith-based convictions around doing so. And I think this is getting a lot of coverage as sort of unnecessary cruelty, I think is the phrase being used a lot, which I think is spot on.
Before we go, we're going to try something new. And now, it's time for a quick fix local rundown with Emily Gilliland and Colin Jones.
Dun dun dun.
So we have 6 stories for you today to pay attention to keep an eye on. Number 1, tomorrow, August 17th, there will be a right-wing rally and left-wing counter-protests that have been advertised for weeks. Portland police predict the August 17th rally, orchestrated by the national far-right extremist group Proud Boys, to devolve into violence. Police set out a map of the expected protest area on the waterfront and encourage Portlanders to find other places to be. Also expect a large amount of left-wing counter-protesters tomorrow, including anti-fascists and other social justice activists at the center of Portland's protest movement.
2, Joey Gibson, leader of alt-right group Patriot Prayer, is being charged with rioting in connection to the May Day incident at Portland's Cider Riot bar. Shortly after the May 1st clash, Cider Riot owner Abe Goodman Armstrong had sued Gibson for negligence and trespassing. Within the past week, Portland Police Bureau also charged 5 other members of the alt-right group for crimes related to the incident. Gibson wrote on his Facebook page Thursday that he is planning to turn himself over to the authorities.
Story 3, Democrat Jamie McLeod Skinner plans to run for Secretary of State 2020. McLeod Skinner ran for Congress against Representative Greg Walden in 2018 and was the most serious challenger for Walden in years. Last week, she registered her political action committee for her 2020 Secretary of State bid. If elected, she said she would pursue auditing private companies that do business with the state.
Number 4, 2 Oregon pharmacies sold millions of opioid pills, making them top in the nation. The 2 rural Oregon pharmacies sold more opioid pills per county resident than 99.9% of other pharmacies in the country. Howard's Drugs is the only pharmacy in Lake County. They filled enough prescriptions for every resident to take 68 pills a year. That puts Howard's 10th on a list of top sellers nationally in the 7-year period ending in 2012. Another pharmacy in Grant County sold one patient more than 1,000 pills in 1 month.
Story 5, a boil water notice has finally been lifted on the Warm Springs Indian Reservation after a 3-month crisis. The reservation had been without safe drinking water after a burst pipe led to several infrastructure failures. Around 4,000 people had been affected. The Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs say many improvements have been made to the infrastructure, including a repair of the water main break, and more construction is expected in the coming months.
6th and finally, Governor Kate Brown signed Oregon Senate Bill 226 into law last month, looking to officially disincorporate Damascus. However, Damascus city officials are filing a petition with the Oregon Supreme Court to challenge that decision. Damascus was originally incorporated as a city in 2004, and since 2013, residents have tried to disincorporate several times, but have run into restrictions in state law that have kept them from doing so.
And that's today's Quick 6 local rundown. What fun!
I'm into that.
That was News of Friends, brought to you by Moralink. Find out more at moralink.biz. X-Ray in the Morning, also supported by our presenting sponsor, Tom Dwyer Automotive. Find out more at tomdwyer.com. Colin, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Not only Tuesday, not only Wednesday, but Friday too.
This is my most News with Friends ever. It's very exciting.
Awesome.
It's
You've
very
made the
exciting.
world a better place, as you do every single
Aw,
day.
shucks.
Up next, we're going to talk about laughter as a form of resistance. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Stay tuned. This is X-Ray, and radio is yours.